Before we begin the final chapter, you need to know everything that brought us here. A young woman named Claire Donovan lived in a house she didn't know was hers. Not just any house. A $500 billion estate sitting on 4,000 acres of the most mineral-rich land in America, lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements that governments and defense industries would pay anything to own. Her father, Richard Harrington, one of America's most private billionaires, had placed every inch of it inside an irrevocable legal trust in Claire's name before she was old enough to understand what a trust was. He built it from his deathbed. He built it because he loved her, and because he knew, the way fathers sometimes know things, that someone would eventually come for what was hers. He was right. Her husband Derek Donovan had spent 3 years running a government contract fraud and money laundering operation with his partner Troy Acaffer. Shell companies. $43 million moved offshore. 3 of those shells registered to Claire's home address, in her name, without her knowledge, positioning her as the fall person the moment everything collapsed. And while Claire was at a prenatal clinic watching her baby's heartbeat on a monitor for the very first time, Derek changed the locks, moved his mistress Vanessa Cole into the estate, and let his mother Margaret Donovan pack his pregnant wife's bags like garbage. When Claire returned to her own home and rang the bell at her own gate, Margaret came through the door and threw those bags directly at her shin. Claire made one phone call, to her father's attorney, Nathan Cross, who had been waiting for that call for years. What Nathan opened on a cafe table that night changed everything: the $500 billion trust, the emergency protective clause on page 47, the mineral rights no one had ever explained to her. Claire gave her testimony to FBI agent Cole Whitfield. Derek and Troy were arrested. Vanessa was evicted. Margaret, who had sold her own home and moved in as if she owned the place, found herself standing on police station steps with nowhere to go. Claire walked back into her home. Then Nathan opened a second folder. A name nobody recognized, a Cayman account, a shadow above Derek and Troy that nobody had yet looked directly at. In part 2, that shadow had a name. Senator William Hatch, a 3-term United States senator who had known about the Harrington minerals for 4 years and had spent 2 of them building a covert operation to steal them from a woman he had decided was too trusting to fight back. His mistress, Vanessa, returned to Claire not to beg, but with a flash drive containing 2 years of recordings that dismantled his entire operation. A corrupt federal judge froze Claire's assets for 72 hours. Nathan was attacked in a parking garage. Margaret, homeless and desperate, walked into the estate with a document she'd stolen from one of Hatch's handlers and traded it for a deal. Claire gave birth to a daughter, Alina, in a hospital room while simultaneously directing her legal team through a federal hearing that reinstated every protection her father had built. And Senator William Hatch was arrested at a national summit podium in front of 400 people and 2 camera crews. Claire came home. She held her daughter. She thought it was over. She was wrong. Because Senator Hatch was never the top. He was the most visible layer of something far older, far darker, and far more dangerous than anything this story had yet shown. The man who hired Hatch the way Hatch hired Derek has been watching from 3 layers of anonymity since part 1, scene 1. He has never appeared. He has never been named. He has been completely invisible, and Claire's victory over Hatch has just made her his primary target. His name is Victor Crane. And part 3 is what he does about her. What happens when the enemy has been inside the investigation from the very beginning? What happens when they frame a new mother for her own father's murder? What happens when they send people into a prison to finish what a car crash couldn't? And what does a woman do? What is she truly, finally, completely capable of when the man who is coming for her also killed the father who loved her? The final chapter starts now, and nothing that came before prepared you for this. The estate was warm in the way it had not been warm for years. The deep, settled warmth of a place that has returned to its rightful owner and finally stopped pretending otherwise. Claire sat at the dining room table at 7 a.m. with Alina asleep in the bassinet beside her, Nathan across the table with his second folder still open, and the specific clarity of a woman who slept 6 hours for the first time in months and woke up understanding, with complete and quiet certainty, that the second folder was not the end of anything. It was an introduction. The Cayman account, she said, who built the architecture above it. Nathan had spent 48 hours on this question. He slid a document across, a financial forensics timeline assembled by the trust's investigative firm, working through the night. The account feeds into a parent structure registered in Zurich. The Zurich structure feeds into a holding entity in Singapore. The Singapore entity is owned on paper by a man named Gerald Marsh, who is 74 years old, lives in Scottsdale, Arizona, and has been dead for 3 years. A ghost company. A ghost company owned by a ghost. Nathan looked at her carefully. But the operational signature, the way the transfers are structured, the cutout pattern, the asset protection layering, it matches the documented methodology of one firm, privately held, Washington-based, 22 years old. He set the last page in front of her. Meridian Strategic Group. Claire looked at the name. I've never heard of them. Nobody has. That is the most terrifying thing about them. Nathan folded his hands. Meridian Strategic operates as a geopolitical risk consulting firm. What they actually do, what the intelligence community has suspected for years without sufficient evidence to act on, is run covert operations for private and government clients simultaneously. Regime destabilization, corporate warfare through blackmail and fabrication. And at least one confirmed death, a federal whistleblower in 2017, officially listed as cardiac arrest. He paused. The founder and CEO is a former CIA operations chief named Victor Crane. Alina made a small sound in the bassinet. Claire reached over without looking and touched her daughter's hand. Alina's fingers wrapped around her thumb and held. Hatch was working for Crane, Claire said. Hatch was working for Crane, Nathan confirmed. From the beginning, the entire operation, Derek, the shells, the forgery, the Mistress, all of it, was built on Crane's methodology and funded through his infrastructure. Hatch was the political face. Crane was the architect. He looked at Claire steadily. And Crane has already accepted advance payment from a foreign government client for a 30-year mineral rights lease on this land. He cannot refund that payment without consequences that would end Meridian Strategic permanently. Claire was quiet for a long time. He needs the land, she said. He needs the land, Nathan said. And every other option he had, Derek, Troy, Hatch, is now in federal custody. He paused. Which means, Claire, you are the only remaining obstacle between Victor Crane and a contract he has already signed. The morning light caught the mahogany frame above the fireplace, the wax seal glinting, her father's note card beside it, patient and permanent and entirely steady. She looked at it, she looked at Alina. Then he'll come after me directly, she said. Yes, Nathan said. Good, she said. That means he'll come where I can see him. Victor Crane had not raised his voice in 11 years. He had found, over a career that began in the CIA's most sensitive operational division and evolved into something the agency would officially deny any connection to, that the people who raised their voices were the people who had already lost control of a situation. Crane did not lose control of situations. He designed them. He staffed them. He ran them with the architectural precision of a man who understood that every human being had exactly two things that could be leveraged, what they wanted and what they feared, and that if you identified both correctly and applied the right pressure at the right moment, any outcome was achievable. He was 58, silver-haired, with the carefully maintained physical presence of a former operative who had never allowed himself to become soft. His office in Washington's K Street corridor was entirely unremarkable, deliberately so. mid-range furniture, no artwork, no plaques, no photographs. The kind of office that a journalist walking past on a building tour would skip without memory. Crane had designed it that way in 2009 and had never changed a single element. His chief of staff, Raymond Carr, was currently in federal custody. This was an operational setback, not a catastrophe. Crane had planned for Carr's exposure as a contingency 18 months ago and had already transitioned his sensitive communications to a secondary handler. Hatch's arrest was more significant, not because of what Hatch knew, but because of what Hatch's public fall had done to the timeline. Crane had 18 months before his foreign client's patience expired, and the advance payment became a liability. He now had considerably less. He sat in his office and reviewed the file his secondary handler had assembled on Claire Harrington Donovan. He read it with the complete, unhurried attention he gave every operational file, not skimming, not summarizing, reading. Every page. He had been doing this since part 1, scene 1 of this story, watching from 3 layers of remove as every instrument he deployed was identified, prosecuted, and removed. He had watched with the patience of a man who understands that the first several moves of any operation are expendable. It is the final move that matters. He set the file down. He looked at the window. Outside, Washington moved in its usual way, purposeful, self-important, entirely convinced of its own significance. Crane had spent 22 years in this city and had developed for it a specific, affectionate contempt. "She thinks Hatch was the ceiling," he said. His secondary handler, seated across from him, nodded. "Let her think that for another 72 hours, Crane said. He picked up a pen not to write anything, just to hold, an old habit. Then we show her the floor." He opened the second folder on his desk, the one his forensic team had spent 6 weeks preparing. The one containing audio files that had been processed through the most sophisticated voice synthesis and audio manipulation technology available on the private market. The one containing a toxicology report that had been fabricated by a pathologist whose gambling debts Crane's people had owned for 4 years. The one that was going to put Claire Harrington Donovan in a federal prison for the murder of her own father. He looked at the fabricated recordings, at Claire's voice, her real voice, harvested from dozens of recorded public statements, estate legal proceedings, and depositions, reconstructed into sentences she had never spoken about a death she had never caused. He did not feel what most people would feel looking at such a document. He felt the specific, contained satisfaction of a craftsman examining finished work before it ships. "Make the call," he said. It came at Claire from 3 directions simultaneously, which was how Crane operated. Never a single line of attack, always a convergence, always structured so that disproving one element didn't collapse the others. The first direction was media. A journalist, a legitimate one, respected, with a 15-year track record of accurate reporting, received an anonymous package containing a 4-page summary of fabricated evidence, suggesting that Richard Harrington's death had involved deliberate poisoning, and that the primary beneficiary of his estate had foreknowledge of his decline. The journalist, operating in good faith, contacted the estate's legal team for comment before publishing, which was the correct journalistic practice. What it also did was give Crane's people 48 hours warning that Claire's team was aware of the incoming attack. They were not ready for the second direction. A former employee of the Harrington estate's household staff, a groundskeeper named Ellis Bowen, who had worked at the estate for 2 years before leaving of his own accord 3 years ago, gave a sworn statement to federal investigators. He stated that he had, on 2 occasions, overheard telephone conversations in which Claire Harrington discussed her father's condition in terms that suggested to him that she knew his death was coming sooner than his doctors had indicated. He stated that he had found this troubling at the time, but had not known what to do with the information. He appeared credible. He appeared sincere. He had, in fact, been approached 4 months ago by a man he knew as a private attorney representing an unnamed client, offered $80,000 deposited into a new account, and coached on his testimony with the patience and thoroughness of someone who had prepared witnesses before. The third direction was the fabricated audio. 2 recordings, entered into the federal record by a prosecutor who had received them through official FBI channels that ran through Assistant Director Thomas Reyes, who had been on Crane's payroll for 3 years, and who processed the recordings as authenticated evidence without triggering the standard chain of custody review protocol. In the recordings, Claire's voice discussed timelines, discussed inheritance, discussed the speed of her father's decline in the specific, clinical language of someone measuring it against an expected schedule. The voice synthesis was extraordinary, built from real recordings of Claire's actual voice, assembled with AI-assisted audio technology into sentences she had never spoken in a life she had never lived. Claire's legal team flagged the recordings as suspicious within 6 hours. They requested an independent forensic audio analysis. The request was processed through Reyes' office. It was delayed. It was still pending 4 days later when the federal arrest warrant was executed. At 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 federal agents arrived at the Harrington Estate's front gate. Claire opened the door herself. She always answered her own door, a habit from before the estate had a full security team, and looked at the warrant in the lead agent's hand. Claire Elizabeth Harrington Donovan, first-degree murder. Victim, Richard James Harrington. The world narrowed to a single point. Eleanor was in the bassinet in the living room. Claire turned and looked at her daughter for one long, specific, complete moment, the way you look at something you are afraid to stop seeing, and then she turned back. She put her hands forward. She did not make them come to her. Her mother, arriving in the hallway from the guest room at the sound of voices, froze. Her hand went to her mouth. Claire. "Call Nathan," Claire said. Her voice was completely level. "Call Nathan right now and take care of Eleanor." The cuffs clicked. She walked out of the home her father built for her in handcuffs, past the mahogany frame, past the wax seal, past the note card, "Everything I built for you," and the door closed behind her. The bail hearing lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. The prosecutor was a man named Gerald Finn, 47, experienced, with the authoritative delivery of someone who has argued before federal courts long enough to make fabricated narratives sound not just plausible, but inevitable. He had received this case 3 days ago through channels he didn't question, with a complete brief and a set of materials he found thoroughly compelling. He was not corrupt. He was simply operating with confidence on evidence he had been given no reason to doubt. He presented Claire to the court as a woman who had murdered her father for $500 billion. He used every quality the audience had spent 2.5 parts of this story watching Claire exercise with admirable restraint, and he held each one to the light and turned it. Her composure, he called it coldness. Her quietness, he called it calculation. Her ability to remain level under extraordinary pressure, he called it the absence of conscience. The specific emotional vacancy of someone for whom even the death of a parent was an operational event to be managed, rather than a loss to be grieved. He showed footage of Claire at the mineral rights boardroom meeting Eleanor in the carrier on her chest, 3 weeks old, Claire conducting a multi-billion-dollar negotiation with complete and grounded authority, and he said to the court, "This is not a grieving daughter. This is an operator. This is a woman who has been operating since before her father drew his last breath." Claire sat beside Nathan's emergency replacement counsel and looked straight ahead. She did not react. She maintained the specific composure that had carried her through everything from the eviction to the crash to the arrest, and the prosecutor pointed at that composure and told the court it proved his point. The judge denied bail. The reasoning, risk of flight, severity of charges, the allegation of a sustained premeditated conspiracy, was legally sufficient and delivered with the careful, measured neutrality of a jurist who had reviewed the materials and found them compelling on their face. Nathan's replacement counsel filed an immediate appeal. It was assigned to a reviewing panel. The assignment was processed through a system where Thomas Reyes, in his capacity as senior supervisory officer on the connected federal case, had influence over procedural routing. The appeal panel was not the panel that would have been assigned under standard protocol. The appeal was denied in 18 hours. Claire was transferred to a federal detention facility on a Wednesday morning. Alina was 3 weeks old. Claire had not slept. She had not eaten. She had sat in a holding cell and thought about her father's face in the photograph beside the mahogany frame, and she had thought about Alina's fingers wrapped around her thumb, and she had thought about all the things her father had built, and all the things she had fought to keep, and she had sat with the understanding, the full, terrible, clear understanding, that she was inside a machine that had been built specifically to consume her, and that the machine was more sophisticated than anything she had yet encountered, and that she was, for the first time in this story, genuinely alone inside it. She did not break, but she bent. She sat in the holding cell and she bent toward the floor with her elbows on her knees and her head down, and she breathed and she bent, and she did not break. And 200 miles away, in a city she had never visited, a man she had never met was watching the coverage of her arrest on a television in a hotel room, and something in his face was changing. Inside the federal detention facility, the psychological operation continued. This was the element of Crane's methodology that distinguished him from every other antagonist in this story. Derek had used brute emotional manipulation. Margaret had used targeted cruelty. Hatch had used institutional power. Crane used something more precise and more devastating than any of these. He used reality itself as a weapon. He had people inside the facility, not just Mercer, the corrections officer on his payroll, but 2 additional assets: a case coordinator who managed Claire's communication access, and a social worker assigned to Claire's case who had been placed in that position 3 months ago in anticipation of exactly this scenario. Through these assets, Crane's operation did the following. Claire's outgoing calls were monitored and selectively delayed. Not blocked, blocked could be proven. Delayed. Long enough that communications with Nathan's team sometimes arrived hours after they were sent, creating gaps in Claire's ability to receive and respond to case developments in real time. Claire would make a call and be told the line was busy. She would try again in 20 minutes. By the time the call connected, the window for a legal motion had sometimes passed. The social worker, a woman who presented as genuinely compassionate and was, in every interaction with Claire, warm and attentive and apparently present, was feeding behavioral reports to Crane's secondary handler, reports that characterized Claire as displaying signs of instability, paranoia, difficulty separating legitimate legal concern from generalized suspicion. These reports were entered into the facility's official record. If the case ever reached a point where Claire's psychological fitness was relevant, and Crane intended to ensure it did, those reports would be available. And then there were the smaller things, the quiet, systematic, unverifiable things. A letter from Alina, Claire's mother, sent updates with photographs, small envelopes that Claire had been told would arrive weekly that didn't come for 11 days. When it finally arrived, 2 photographs were missing. Claire couldn't prove they had ever been sent. The social worker, when Claire mentioned it, looked at her with gentle, concerned attention and suggested that the mail system was occasionally slow, and that it might help Claire to try to manage expectations around things she couldn't control. It was so well constructed that Claire, who had survived everything this story had thrown at her, found herself doing something she had never done before. She questioned herself. Not dramatically, not visibly, in the quiet, private way that gaslighting works on even the most grounded people, as a small, persistent voice asking whether maybe, this time, you are seeing threats that aren't there. Whether maybe the composure you've relied on has been carrying you so long that you've lost the ability to distinguish between genuine threat assessment and paranoia. She sat with this for 3 days. Then, on the 4th day, she caught the case coordinator looking at her phone immediately after Claire hung up from a call. Just a glance, just a second. The case coordinator looked away instantly, and Claire said nothing, and the moment passed. But Claire noted it, filed it, the way she filed everything. She pulled a small piece of paper from the legal pad Nathan's team had supplied her for case notes. She wrote one sentence. She folded it into her sock. She waited. On the 5th day, she found a way to pass it to a different inmate, a woman with a court appearance scheduled for the following morning, with a phone number written beneath the sentence. The inmate, who owed Claire nothing and was asked for nothing except this one delivery, looked at the note and looked at Claire and tucked it into her waistband without a word. The note read, "Communications monitored. Someone on Crane's payroll inside facility. Get this to Nathan Cross immediately." Nathan received it the following afternoon. He made a call. The attack happened on a Wednesday evening at 6:47 p.m. in a shower corridor on the facility's 2nd residential block. Sergeant Dale Mercer had spent 14 years as a corrections officer without a single formal complaint. 2 commendations. A photograph on the staff appreciation wall outside the facility director's office. He was the kind of man nobody looked at twice, which was precisely why Crane's handler had identified him 4 years ago and spent 2 of them building a relationship, slow, patient, financial, that culminated in a single instruction delivered via burner phone on a Tuesday night. The 2 inmates Mercer activated were not violent people by disposition. One was a woman named Diane, serving 8 years on a financial crime charge, whose elderly mother was 3 months behind on a medical debt that had just been acquired by a collections firm with unusual urgency. The other was a woman named Tasha, whose appeal, pending for 2 years, had suddenly received a private assurance, communicated through an attorney she'd never met, that the right outcome was achievable if she did one thing first. Neither of them wanted to be there. Both of them were. This is what Crane's operation looked like at the human level, not evil exactly, but the harvest of desperation. The camera gap was 14 minutes. Mercer had arranged it through the maintenance schedule 3 days earlier. Claire fought. This needs to be said clearly and completely. She fought with everything she had. She was 6 weeks postpartum, her left arm still in the final stages of healing from the Part 1 fracture, alone in a facility that had been structurally compromised against her. She fought anyway. She used the wall. She used her elbows. She used the specific, furious refusal of a woman who has survived too much to go quietly, and who has a daughter waiting for her outside and a father's legacy to carry forward, and absolutely no intention of stopping. There were 3 of them. She went down. The beating was methodical and severe. When Mercer found her 12 minutes later, timing his discovery carefully, arriving as the first person to respond, she was unconscious on the floor. He called for the medical team with exactly the right note of shock in his voice. She was transferred to the facility's hospital wing. Her condition was listed as critical: 3 fractured ribs, a cerebral concussion serious enough to require immediate neurological evaluation. She did not regain consciousness for 18 hours. Eleanor was 30 miles away, held in her grandmother's arms, entirely unaware. The news broke publicly at 11 p.m. A journalist who had been following the case since the arrest received a tip from inside the facility. Not a tip from Crane's people, but from the inmate Claire had passed her note through, who had a cousin with a phone and a conscience, and posted a 4-sentence update that moved across every platform within the hour. Wrongfully imprisoned new mother Claire Harrington Donovan beaten into coma inside federal detention facility. Infant daughter separated from mother. Sources indicate attack was coordinated. No arrest made. In a hotel room in a city 200 miles away. A man named Marcus Cole read those 4 sentences on his phone at 11:07 p.m. He had been following this case since the arrest. He had been following it the way he followed every case that carried the specific architectural signature of a judicial assassination, with the practiced, methodical attention of someone who has seen this before and knows exactly what it means and exactly what it requires. He set his phone down. He booked a flight. He packed one bag. He called his foundation's investigator at 11:15 p.m. and said 4 words, "Pull everything. We're moving." Marcus Cole arrived at the detention facility at 8 a.m. He was turned away at the first gate. Standard procedure, Claire's visitor list had been restricted at the case coordinator's recommendation, citing the ongoing investigation. Marcus stood at the gate and looked at the officer and did not argue. He turned around. He walked back to his car. He set up his phone on the dashboard. He pressed record. He looked into the camera. And for the next 11 minutes on a live stream that his foundation's social media team promoted in real time to their 200,000-person following, he spoke. He spoke with the specific, controlled authority of a man who has stood on the steps of federal buildings and courtrooms and legislative chambers, and has learned that the most powerful thing a voice can do is stay completely level while describing things that should make it break. He described the case, the fabricated audio, the coached witness, the bail denial, the communication delays, the attack, the camera gap. He named Mercer not as confirmed, but as the subject of a formal investigation he was filing within the hour. He described Crane's operation with the evidence he had and connected every documented element to Meridian's strategic group with the precision of a lawyer who knows exactly what he can prove and exactly where the line is. He looked into the camera and said, "A woman who fought to keep her father's home, survived a car crash in the dark, gave birth to her daughter while directing a federal hearing, and brought down a United States senator, is now lying in a hospital bed inside a federal facility, because the man who sent the car and hired the senator and built the entire operation has decided that if he can't steal her land, he will bury her under a charge that destroys the one thing she has always had, her father's name." He stopped the live stream. He filed the formal complaint regarding the camera gap. He filed a motion for emergency independent forensic audio analysis, bypassing the standard channel that ran through Ray's and filing directly with the DOJ's Independent Review Office. He filed a request for all facility surveillance data for the 72 hours surrounding the attack. By noon, the livestream had 2 million views. Red circle, stop right here. You are watching the moment this story changes forever. A man who had every reason not to get involved just walked into the most dangerous situation in this entire 3-part story, for a woman he has never met. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments right now. Globe showing Europe, Africa, we have viewers on every continent, and we want to see every single one of you in those comments. Tell us, do you think Marcus can save Claire? And what do you think should happen to Victor Crane? Comment your verdict. We read every single one. And listen, this channel is less than 200 subscribers away from 1,000. Less than 200. We are so close. If this story has kept you up tonight, if you felt Marcus's 11-minute live stream in your chest, hit subscribe right now. Tell one person. Share this story. We can cross 1,000 together before part 3 ends. Less than 200 to go. Let's finish this. Fire. Now back to Marcus, because he's just getting started. Marcus Cole visited his sister for the first time in 2 years that same afternoon. Vanessa opened her hotel door and saw her brother standing in the hallway, and the specific, complicated expression that crossed her face, guilt and relief, and the specific vulnerability of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and has just seen the person they most needed to put it down in front of lasted exactly 3 seconds before she stepped back and let him in. They sat across from each other. He did not perform anger. He asked questions. She answered all of them, the recruitment, the flash drive, the recordings, everything she had given to Claire and Whitfield in Part 2. Marcus listened with the complete, unhurried attention that characterized everything he did. When she finished, he said, "The car recordings, the ones on the flash drive. Did you get anything above car? Any communication that went above Hatch's office?" Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "There was one call, Carr speaking to someone whose voice I never identified. I included it on the drive, but nobody focused on it because Carr's voice was enough to make the Hatch case." She looked at Marcus. "You think it's Crane?" "I think if we run voice analysis on that one call against Crane's public testimony footage from his 2008 Senate confirmation hearing for an unrelated committee, there is enough recorded material to compare." He looked at her steadily. "I need a copy of the original drive. The one you gave Whitfield may have been processed through Ray's. I need the uncompromised original." Vanessa reached under the mattress of her hotel bed and produced a small case. Inside it, a second flash drive, identical to the first. "I always make a copy," she said. "I learned that a long time ago." Marcus looked at his sister. Something moved across his face that was not yet forgiveness, but was adjacent to it in the way that the first light before dawn is adjacent to morning. "I know," he said. Mercer ran on a Thursday night. He had been watching Marcus's public filings accumulate with the growing dread of a man watching a net close around him in real time, and when the formal request for surveillance data landed on the facility director's desk Thursday afternoon, with a simultaneous copy filed directly to the DOJ Inspector General, bypassing every channel Ray's controlled. Mercer understood that the 14-minute camera gap was about to be formally examined by people who would find exactly what he had done with it. He cleaned out his personal locker at 10:47 p.m. He left through the staff exit on the building's east side. He moved quickly toward the parking structure. Marcus was in the parking structure. He had been there since 10 p.m., in a rental car 3 rows from the exit, because he had been doing this long enough to understand that when a guilty man realizes the net is closing, he always runs toward the one exit he believes is clear. Marcus had identified the staff exit as Mercer's most likely escape route 4 hours earlier, and had simply positioned himself accordingly and waited. He did not rush when Mercer appeared. He got out of the car slowly. Mercer saw him, stopped, assessed, made the specific, incorrect calculation that a man in civilian clothes outside a parking structure was not a threat. He was wrong about that in a way that became immediately and comprehensively clear. Marcus Cole is a former Marine Special Operations veteran. The physical resolution of this encounter took 9 seconds. What followed the 9 seconds was more important. Marcus's phone, already recording on a live cloud upload he had activated before he left the car, captured everything. Mercer on the ground. Mercer's breathing stabilizing. Marcus's voice, calm and specific. "You have one opportunity to tell me everything. I need the name of the handler who contracted you, and I need the names of the 2 inmates. I need to know who made the offer to each of them and what the offer was. I need all of it right now." Mercer told him everything, on camera, for 7 minutes. He named Carl Briggs as Crane's handler. The 2 inmates, Diane and Tasha, were approached separately by Marcus's investigator the following morning with their documented coercion clearly laid out before them. Not as accusation, as documentation, as the thing that had been done to them and that could now be used on their behalf if they cooperated. Both women who had not wanted to be in that corridor, who had not wanted any part of what Mercer had organized, who had been pushed into it by the specific vulnerabilities that Crane's operation had identified and applied pressure to, chose themselves. They gave their full statements within the hour. Carl Briggs was harder. Briggs was 42, former Meridian Strategic Field operative, and he was not Mercer. He had been in situations before. He did not panic. When Marcus located him at his consulting cover address and arrived at his door, Briggs assessed the situation in the first 3 seconds, made a professional decision, and went for his weapon. The fight that followed was the most dangerous 3 minutes in Marcus's life since his second tour. Briggs was trained. Marcus was trained differently. The difference was sufficient, but only by the margin that determines whether a man goes home to his foundation or doesn't. Marcus's forearm carried the knife wound the entire way through the rest of the story. 11 stitches. He got them himself from a kit in the car outside Briggs's building because going to a hospital would take time he didn't have. Briggs, on the ground and disarmed, made his own professional calculation. He was a man who understood odds. The odds of Crane protecting him at this stage of the operation's collapse were not favorable. The odds of federal cooperation securing a better outcome than Crane's version of accountability were considerably better. He gave his statement. He named Victor Crane directly, explicitly, and in enough operational detail to constitute the most significant corroborating evidence assembled against Meridian Strategic in the company's 22-year history. Marcus sent the files to Whitfield at midnight. Then he went to the hospital. Claire regained consciousness on a Friday morning. The world assembled itself slowly, ceiling tiles, medical equipment, the specific quality of institutional light. She did not move immediately. She lay still and let herself understand where she was and what her body was reporting. The ribs, the head, the deep, comprehensive soreness of someone whose body has absorbed something it was not designed to absorb. And she conducted this inventory with the quiet, methodical patience of a woman who has learned that the first thing to do in any situation is to understand it completely before you move. Then she turned her head. Marcus Cole was in the chair beside her bed. She had never seen him in person. She had seen the live stream footage from outside the facility gate, which her mother had shown her through Nathan on a secure call the day before the attack. She had seen the press coverage. She knew who he was. He looked in person like someone who had been through something recently and had not yet had time to address it. There was tape on his left forearm over what was clearly stitching. There were shadows under his eyes. He was sitting in the chair with the particular stillness of a man who has been awake for too long and has chosen not to acknowledge it. "Eleanor," she said, first word, not hello, not what happened, Eleanor. "With your mother, safe. Your mother has been notified you're awake." His voice was measured and warm. "They'll be here in 40 minutes. She breathed. "The case," she said. "Building." He told her concisely, sequentially, Mercer's confession, Diane and Tasha's statements, Briggs's full testimony naming Crane. He told her about Vanessa's second flash drive and the unidentified voice on the final car recording, which his investigator had run against Crane's 2008 Senate testimony footage overnight. The voice match had come back at 91%, enough for a legal foundation. Not yet enough for a court-admissible certainty. They needed 2 more hours for the lab to sign off. "There's something else," Marcus said. Something in his voice changed, not louder, not softer, but different in a way that produced in Claire the specific, quiet alertness of someone who has learned to read tonal shifts as information. "When I was investigating the fabricated toxicology report, tracking the forensic pathologist Crane used, my investigator found something in the original autopsy documentation, something that wasn't in the official report but appears in a secondary file that Crane's team created to support their fabrication." He looked at her steadily. They made the mistake of building their fiction close enough to the truth that the truth showed through. He set a document on the bed beside her. She picked it up with her good hand. "A compound," he said, "present in your father's system at levels too low to trigger standard screening. the kind of levels that result from microdose administration over an extended period. The compound prolongs the deterioration of specific cardiac conditions when introduced gradually. It would have looked exactly like natural progression. It would have been invisible to every standard test. He paused. It was not invisible to the analysis my investigator ran once we knew to look for it. Claire was reading the document. She read it once. She read it again. Your father's heart disease was real, Marcus said. His decline was real, but the speed of it, the 6 months from diagnosis to death that his doctors found unusually fast, was not entirely natural. He waited. Crane had a medical operative inside your father's consultation chain, a private physician who presented himself as a specialist referral in the final year of your father's life. We've identified him. He disappeared from his registered address 8 days after your father died. The room was completely silent. Claire set the document down. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at it for a long time. Outside the window, the morning was doing what mornings do, light moving, indifferent, the world continuing in its ordinary way, completely unaware of what was being understood in this room. When she looked back at Marcus, what he saw in her face was something he had not seen there before in any footage or photograph or coverage of everything she had survived across 3 parts of this story. Something past grief, something past rage, something that had been forged in heat and pressure from both of those things and come out the other side as something with no name except intention. Crane killed my father, she said. Yes, Marcus said. She was quiet for another moment. How long to finish the case? 60 hours. Build it, she said. Build every piece of it. And Marcus, he looked at her. Add first-degree murder to the filing. Make sure the charge lands in the same document as everything else. I want him to read his own indictment and see my father's name on it. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Done, he said. The assassination attempt on Marcus happened at 11:20 p.m. on a Saturday, in a parking garage 3 blocks from the hotel where Vanessa was staying. Victor Crane had operated for 22 years on a foundational principle. Problems that cannot be solved through institutional mechanisms must be solved through direct action. Marcus Cole had now dismantled 3 of Crane's institutional mechanisms, Mercer, the inmates, Briggs, and had identified the voice on the final recording as Crane's own. He was 60 hours from a completed case. He was the single remaining obstacle between Crane and the possibility of managing his exposure through the legal and political connections Crane had spent 2 decades building. Sandra Voss was the best contractor Crane had used in 11 years, former intelligence operative, 3 confirmed eliminations across 2 continents. She moved through the parking garage with the professional ease of someone for whom these environments are familiar and the outcome is already determined. She fired twice. Marcus moved on the first shot, not because he saw it coming, because his body had 17 years of accumulated military response time and had already moved before his conscious mind had processed the sound. The first shot missed by 4 inches. The second caught his right shoulder. He went down behind a parked car. He did not stay down. What followed was not a movie fight. It was dark and close and frightening and determined by the fact that Marcus Cole was a former Special Operations Marine who had survived 2 combat tours, and Sandra Voss, for all her skill, had never in her career encountered a target who fought back like this. He used the cars. He used the dark. He bled from the shoulder and kept moving. When he got close enough, he disarmed her with the concentrated, efficient violence of a man who has exactly one objective and has removed everything else from consideration. She was alive. She was in custody. She was on camera, his phone, live cloud upload, running before he entered the garage because Marcus Cole had learned years ago that documentation is the only armor that survives everything. He called Whitfield from the garage floor, shoulder wound wrapped with his own jacket. "I need a medical team and I need you to come personally," he said. "I have a contractor, she'll talk, and Cole come alone, don't tell Rays." Whitfield was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Why not Rays?" "Because I'm going to show you something when you get here," Marcus said. "That is going to be the worst night of your professional life." Whitfield arrived in 22 minutes. Marcus showed him the access log analysis, the pattern of redactions, the delayed analyses, the systematically managed ceiling on the investigation across 3 years. He showed him Rays's name at the center of every gap. He showed him the routing of the fabricated audio evidence, how it had entered the federal record through channels that Rays controlled, bypassing standard authentication protocol at precisely the steps where the fabrication would have been detectable. Whitfield sat in the car in the parking garage and looked at the documents for a very long time. He looked at the name. Thomas Rays, his supervisor for 6 years, the man who had approved the investigation that made Whitfield's career, the man who had sat across from him in briefings and budget meetings and late-night working sessions and had, across all of those years, been managing the case's boundaries from the inside to protect a man Whitfield had never heard of. "How long?" Whitfield said. 3 years, Marcus said, "since before part 1 of this story started." Whitfield sat with this. Then he picked up his personal phone, not his official device, and called the Department of Justice Inspector General. He had made this call once before, in part 2, about a corrupt judge. He made it differently now, more quietly, with the specific weight of a man who is reporting a betrayal that is also a personal loss. "I have a problem inside my own building," he said. "I need an emergency team at my location, tonight." A pause. "And I need Thomas Rays placed on administrative suspension before 7 a.m. tomorrow. Don't route the order through standard channels. Send it directly." He hung up. He looked at Marcus. 60 hours, he said. 58 now, Marcus said. "Then let's move." The simultaneous filing happened at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, 59 hours after Marcus sat beside Claire's hospital bed, and she told him to build every piece of it. Marcus had not slept more than 4 hours across those 59. The shoulder wound had been treated at a clinic at 3 a.m. on Sunday. 12 stitches, antibiotics, a sling he immediately removed because it limited his range of motion and he had work to do. His investigator, James Obey, had worked in parallel on 3 separate evidence tracks and had delivered the final piece, the lab-confirmed voice match between the unidentified car recording and Crane's 2008 Senate committee testimony footage, rated at 93% confidence, signed by 2 independent forensic audio specialists, at 6 a.m. Wednesday. The case was complete. And Marcus Cole filed it everywhere, simultaneously, because he had spent 8 years learning that filing through a single channel in a corrupted system is how cases disappear. He filed with the DOJ Inspector General. He filed with the Senate Judiciary Committee, which had been ferociously motivated since Hatch's arrest and was now operating under emergency session procedures. He filed with the International Investigative Journalism Consortium, 3 outlets, 4 countries, that had been building their own parallel investigation of Meridian Strategic for 18 months, and received Marcus's complete documentation as the final piece their own case had been missing. He also filed 1 additional document that had not been part of any previous plan. A direct criminal referral addressed to the Attorney General of the United States, charging Victor Crane with the first-degree murder of Richard James Harrington, complete with the toxicology analysis, the medical operative's identified profile, the timeline of his insertion into Richard's care, the forensic chain connecting his involvement to Meridian Strategic's operational records. At 9 a.m. the filings went out. By 10 a.m. every major network was running the Meridian Strategic story. By noon, Federal marshals were executing search warrants at Meridian's Washington, London, and Zurich offices simultaneously. An international coordination that Whitfield had spent 48 hours arranging through the FBI's legal attaché offices. By 3 p.m., Thomas Reyes was escorted from the FBI building where he had worked for 19 years, walked out the main entrance, in view of the building's lobby and the people in it, by 2 agents who had been assigned specifically by the Inspector General's office and who reported to no one in Reyes's chain of command. At 4 p.m., Kevin Park, the junior Meridian strategic analyst who had been documenting the firm's illegal operations for 18 months and had been waiting for exactly the right person to bring them to, was placed in federal protective custody with full cooperation status. His internal documentation added 43 additional pieces of corroborating evidence to the criminal case. At 5:47 p.m., a black government SUV pulled onto the tarmac of a small regional airport in Northern Virginia, where a private aircraft was running its pre-departure checklist. Victor Crane was standing at the foot of the air stairs in a gray suit, a carry-on bag at his feet, a secondary passport in his pocket under a name that Marcus's investigator had located in Meridian's internal records at 4 a.m. and transmitted to Whitfield at 4:15. 2 agents came from the left, 2 from the right. The aircraft's engines were still running. Agent Cole Whitfield walked from the third vehicle. Marcus Cole walked beside him. Crane looked at both of them. He looked at the agents. He looked at the aircraft behind him, which was not going anywhere. He stood very still for a moment, the specific stillness of a man running calculations at speed. And then the calculations completed and he knew, with the absolute professional certainty of someone who has spent his career understanding irreversible situations, that this one was irreversible. He did not run. He did not speak. He put his bag down carefully and put his hands up with the same flat, composed expression he had worn in every photograph ever taken of him. The cuffs clicked. Marcus looked at Whitfield. Whitfield looked at Marcus. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing that needed saying. All charges against Claire Elizabeth Harrington Donovan were dropped by 8 p.m. the same evening. Every fabricated document formally withdrawn from the federal record. The falsified toxicology report exposed and retracted. Ellis Bowen's coach testimony recanted, Bowen himself charged with perjury. The forensic pathologist's license revoked and federal fraud charges filed. And Richard Harrington's death officially reclassified. Victor Crane's charge sheet was 23 pages long. On page 19, between conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice and violation of the Arms Control Export Act, was one line. Count 17, murder in the first degree. Victim, Richard James Harrington. She walked out of the federal detention facility on a Thursday morning. Her mother was at the entrance with a leaner, 7 weeks old now, held against her grandmother's chest with the protective grip of a woman who has spent 3 weeks making herself enough for a baby who needed her mother. Claire came through the door and her mother turned and held Alina out, and Claire took her with the specific, complete, total desperation of a woman who has been separated from her newborn for 3 weeks and has survived everything you have just watched her survive in order to reach this single moment. She didn't speak. She held her daughter. She stood on the steps of the federal detention facility in the morning light, and she held Alina and breathed, and the world, which had been running so loud and so fast and so brutally against her for so long, went briefly, mercifully quiet. Alina looked up at her with the focused, dark-eyed attention of a baby who knows her mother's smell and voice and warmth, and has been missing all three, and is now deciding, with the absolute authority of someone 7 weeks old who has already developed very strong opinions about the world, that she is not letting go. Her fingers wrapped around Claire's thumb, held. "Hi, baby," Claire whispered. "Hi." Nathan was there, recovered, standing 10 feet away with the expression of a man who has spent 22 years protecting Richard Harrington's legacy and is watching the reason that legacy mattered. Whitfield was 50 feet away, giving her the space a decent man gives someone coming out of something like this. Her mother was crying quietly in the way mothers cry when the danger has finally passed and they can finally afford to. Marcus Cole was standing by the car, far enough to give her room, close enough to be present. He had his arm in a sling, the shoulder wound this time, not the forearm, and the specific quiet of a man who has finished a very large thing and is not yet sure what to do with the silence that follows it. She looked at him over Alina's head. He looked back. No words. Between two people who have been through genuine fire together and found each other worthy, sometimes silence is the exact right language. She walked to him, she stopped in front of him, Alina in her arms. Her father's name cleared, the land intact behind her and stretching in every direction for 4,200 acres. She looked at Marcus Cole and she said, simply and completely, "Thank you." He nodded once, the way her father used to nod when words were insufficient and he wanted you to know he understood. They drove home. The final fates assembled themselves cleanly and permanently in the weeks that followed. Victor Crane was convicted on 23 federal counts, including first-degree murder, and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He was 60 years old on the day of sentencing. He walked into the sentence without expression. He would die inside a federal maximum security facility. Thomas Reyes received 22 years. He refused to cooperate and received no consideration. Derek Donovan's sentence was expanded to 23 years. His cooperation had been incomplete, and the court did not forgive this. He read his Bible in his cell and sat with what he had done. Margaret Donovan served 3 years in minimum security, quietly and without complaint, and on the day of her release, she wrote a letter not to Claire but to Alina, which Claire read and kept in a wooden box in the nursery closet for when her daughter was old enough to decide for herself. Vanessa Cole had all charges dropped. She left the city on a Tuesday. Marcus received a text from her the morning she left. He saved it in a folder he didn't delete. The mineral rights bidding closed at $62 billion for a 30-year lease to a consortium that met every environmental and community condition Claire had specified. Not sold. Leased. Her father's land was not for sale. 2 months after her exoneration, Marcus Cole returned to his foundation. His 24th wrongful conviction case, officially logged as closed successful, entered the Foundation's record and the law school curricula of 7 universities simultaneously. He called Claire 3 weeks after his return. The conversation was brief, warm, and practical. Both of them were working. There was something in the quality of the call that neither of them commented on, something the audience recognized without needing it named, that suggested this was not the last conversation. The final image was this. The estate mourning, the same window, the same gold light. Claire stood at the bay window with Alina in her arms. Alina was wide awake, alert, watching the light move across the ceiling with the concentrated, wondering attention of someone encountering the world for the first time and finding it full of things worth looking at. Claire looked at the mahogany frame, the property deed, the wax seal, her father's note card, "Everything I built for you," patient and permanent in its smaller frame beside it. And beside these, new, a large framed photograph of Richard Harrington, his Foundation annual report portrait, the one where he is looking directly at the camera with the expression of a man who has thought about everything that matters and arrived at peace with every conclusion. And below it, in a new frame, a new note card, in Claire's handwriting, slightly slanted, the way his always was. "He built it, we kept it, you'll carry it forward." She lifted Alina so her daughter's eyeline reached the photograph. Alina looked at it with the unfocused, open attention of someone who doesn't yet have vocabulary for what she's seeing but is, somehow, already taking it in. That's your grandfather, Claire said, quietly. The way you say the most important things. He never got to meet you, but he built everything you're standing on. She held her daughter closer. Remember that, Alina. When it gets hard, and it will get hard, remember that. The baby's fingers tightened around her thumb. The morning light moved across the floor, across the mahogany frame, across Richard's face in the photograph, steady, warm, entirely at peace. The camera pulled back, through the window, up over the driveway, over the gate, over 4,200 acres stretching in every direction. Beneath it, patient, irreplaceable, entirely hers, the earth her father loved. The earth that had survived everything. The earth that would outlast all of it. Permanent. Hers. Forever. The end. Speech balloon, this story is finished, and we need to hear from you one final time. Drop your country in the comments. Tell us what you felt when Claire walked out of that facility and held Alina. Tell us if justice was enough. Tell us what you think happens between Claire and Marcus. Tell us which moment across all 3 parts hit you the hardest. We read every single comment. And this channel is less than 200 subscribers from 1,000. You have just watched one of the longest, most emotional stories this channel has ever told. If it meant something to you, if any part of these 3 episodes kept you up, made you angry, made you cry, made you want to tell someone about it, subscribe right now. And share this with one person tonight. Less than 200 subscribers. We can cross 1,000 together before this week is out. Thank you for watching all 3 parts. Thank you for every comment, every share, every subscriber who made this story worth telling in full.